Just ahead, the hidden billionaire windfalls and the CARES Act. We'll look at what happens when the benefits run out, George Floyd, and more as Labor This Week begins now. As we come on the air, protesters are marching in 75 cities, and many of those cities are burning. The president sits in the White House paralyzed with indecision. The Congress is in virtual hiding. The pandemic rages on, and America seems lost and on its knees. Yet as Rome burns and Nero tweets, figures now show that American billionaires got $434 billion richer over the last couple of months. Indeed, with 40 million Americans now having filed for unemployment benefits and 1 in 4 Americans who work out of work, Amazon's Jeff Bezos added $34 billion to his wealth, and Mark Zuckerberg added $25 billion. Those numbers based on data gathered by Forbes and analyzed by 2 separate nonprofits. Indeed, members of the billionaire class, almost all, gained from hidden real estate tax breaks and other hidden giveaways in the CARES Act. But the lion's share seems to have gone to the tech giants, including Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and Larry Ellison with investor Warren Buffett, and even Jeff Bezos' now ex-wife Mackenzie, growing substantially wealthier. And yet, many Americans are now facing an end to benefits that have helped them through the last 2 months. I'll be back with that story in just a moment. With a quarter of the working population out of work, what will happen next? The Paycheck Protection Program benefits were supposed to keep workers on the payrolls, but they will expire at the end of June. The $600 weekly added unemployment benefit will expire at the end of July. Between 40 and 60 million people are without health insurance, and the payroll firm ADP estimates that 40% of the shuttered businesses will never again open. The airlines, who were supposed to protect jobs through the end of September, are finding ways to get around the rules of that $58 billion bailout, and businesses that try to struggle back for the most part are seeing a void of customers walking through their doors. Indeed, many of those who have been fortunate enough to keep their jobs are now beginning to see salary cuts, and the idea of planning for the next phase in one's career no longer exists for many. Upward mobility, for at least now, has ceased to exist. Congress is now debating a new relief package called the HEROES Act, and it is designed to aid states and local governments in functioning going forward by offering up $1 trillion over the next couple of years. Now, without this injection of federal monies, states, many of whom must operate with a balanced budget by law, will be unable to spend on education, public protection, and public works, and more, and that means that local contractors and goods and service providers who deal with the governments will be unable to stay in business, and it would mean layoffs and job losses in the government sector. That, of course, would cause a further erosion of tax revenue for those distressed governments, making the problem still worse. The HEROES Act also has provisions for an additional $1,200 stimulus check for Americans and extensions of both the $600 unemployment benefit and some favorable changes to small business loan rules. But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who is in a tight race for his seat in Kentucky, said recently that the next stimulus bill for Americans will be written in the Senate and supported by the Trump administration. Read Republicans, a direct slam at the already passed by Democrats $3 trillion plan the House has written. Indeed, there is absolutely no chance that the bill, as currently written, will see the light of day in a divided Washington. I'll be right back with the headlines. We'll begin with Betsy DeVos. You remember her. She's the one from Michigan who gave large sums of money through her family to the Trump campaign and has never worked in education, but is Trump's Secretary of Education. Her family is so wealthy that they own a small airline's worth of 14 jets and helicopters that they use anytime they want. Well, just the same, it seems Madam Secretary doesn't want folks in need to have loan forgiveness for student debts, including many former students of scammy places like DeVry University and the likes, who are more than happy to take your money in the form of a federally backed loan, teach you an unsaleable skill, and not find you a job that they promised. This in spite of calls from veterans organizations who say American vets would be one of the most harmed groups by the new rules. Moving on, interestingly enough though, staying with the DeVos clan, Madam Secretary's brother, one Eric Prince, who is a security contractor, whatever that means, and has very close ties to the Trump administration and other nefarious government leaders across the globe, has been using former American and British spies to infiltrate liberal institutions and Democratic congressional campaigns. Of note is the most recent effort to get spies inside many labor unions. Beware the family rich enough to own its own Air Force. While rent defaults have remained surprisingly low during the economic meltdown, with federal relief efforts slated to run out soon, and a protracted battle in Washington underway to fund anything further, that may soon not be the case. Many states have disallowed evictions, but that will soon end. And according to Columbia law professor Emily Benfer, we could see an avalanche of evictions across the country. First hit will be the most vulnerable, who used some of their $1,200 stimulus checks to pay last month's rent. Now, unlike the Great Depression in the 30s, when house owners were the largest and first group to lose their homes, this time around it is the renters who are expected to suffer the most. And finally, from shelter to the most basic of human needs, food. Only a small fraction of the 30 million plus children, let that sink in for a minute, 30 million plus children who find themselves hungry in this country have been reached by the emergency food program created 2 months ago by Congress. Called the Pandemic EBT, the aim of the program was to catch those children who counted on one solid and nutritious meal a day from school lunch meals, but can no longer attend school. Indeed, 16 states still lack federal approval to begin sending money to those most in need. That's how the program works. They'll take money instead of the child being able to get food at school. They're going to send money to the families to use to buy food. Just that. They can't use it for anything else. Many of these states are across the South, and Utah, in fact, declined to set up an in-state program necessary to disperse the funds altogether. They are children. For God's sakes, they are not votes. I want my country back. I'll be back with my thoughts about George Floyd. We are a nation in peril. The heinous murder of George Floyd at the hands of an overzealous policeman with rage and hatred in his eyes is by any measure a horrible and despicable act by one human being against another. Sadly, a death penalty conviction would be impossible to win, even if it's an option in Minnesota, which I don't know, and that's not the point. It's what Mr. Floyd's murderer deserves, in my opinion. And while race and the mistreatment of our black community was the match that lit the fire of outrage being acted out in our nation's streets and neighborhoods, the bonfire that the match lit has been burning and in the making for some 50 years. The disproportionate mistreatment of blacks in America at the hands of law enforcement is but one layer of the fire that now rages. It is about a race, and to a large extent a multi-race class of working people who feel helpless and exhausted from a fight that has seen them grow farther and farther from any chance at bettering themselves for generations now. And now, as the pandemic has plunged a quarter of our working population into an abyss, these folks have disproportionately borne the brunt of the deaths from COVID-19. They have been elevated to the title of essential worker without regard to the dangers they face, without proper protection or, in most cases, compensatory pay. Many have been forced to choose between taking a chance of getting sick or feeding their families. Imagine that. Imagine that. They have faced a disproportionate loss of jobs, with many of them already in households that earn a mere $40,000 a year. Households, $40,000 a year. Most can barely afford rent in the cities where they live. Many rely on assistance just to make ends meet and put food on the table. Very many work 2 jobs. Most have no benefits. They have been beaten down to where they can go down no further. And they are not just black and brown skinned, they are white as well, and everybody else. They are old, middle-aged, and they are young. And despite what Fox News and Donald Trump would have you think, they have joined together on the protest lines. They have not seen the color of each other's skin. They have seen only a common cause. They are finally saying to this world, I am mad as hell and I am not going to take it anymore. Mr. Floyd's murder at the hands of the police has been the last straw. It is now us versus them. Understand this. Them is the billionaire class, the millionaire class, the Republican-led U.S. Senate, the entire Trump cabinet in Washington, corporate America, the Koch brothers, and their 50-some-odd shadow organizations. Them is the flailing and failing president who is hopelessly inept at his job and has been a poison on American society as he offers a wink and a nod to his camouflaged and Confederate flag-waving sycophants who are too stupid to understand that they are as much a target of the rigged system as anyone else. They are fools. But they aren't most of us. Most of us are in this together, despite our color and our land of origin and our religious belief. Many of us are joining in the protests because we understand while George Floyd was an innocent black man, he simply must be the last man or woman in this country that will be taken advantage of by the small minority that makes up our wealthy and corrupt leaders. Rest in peace, Mr. Floyd. May we all serve your memory well, and may your death be our inspiration to say never again in my America. I'm Mark Harrison.